What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another episode of the Dangerous Game podcast. This is season 1, episode 2. Conceptually, I was going to make this episode about the idea of ignorance versus stupidity. But the more I started actually recording and talking about this, I went through some iterations of it that I did not necessarily enjoy the topic as much as I originally thought it was. I thought it was a really solid topic, but I really only could get through 10, maybe 15 minutes of talking about it. I also opted into not doing a live version of the podcast for this week, and I think going forward, I'm not going to do many live versions of it. It just gives me the more creative opportunities to be able to look through this and kind of, because I'm a solo host most of the time, I'm going to be looking to just kind of figure out what topics I want to do and experiment with them. And doing a live format doesn't allow me to do that experimentation. I'm kind of locked into the topic. That being said, next week will be a live format one because I'll have my current collegiate coach with me, and we'll be talking about the current state of collegiate League of Legends and what we hope to see in the future for it to continue growing, and potentially if our views on if it will die out or not. But as for this episode, guys, I think that topic wise, I kind of want to focus it more on a combination of where players need to be able to accept understanding of learning in League of Legends, and potentially talking about kind of the way that Riot has bred this idea that ignorance equals stupidity, or at least the community within the game of League of Legends has bred this idea. So let's kind of start off by defining what ignorance is and what stupidity is. This is kind of a weird, long-winded topic, but when looking at it, ignorance is the lack of knowledge, the lack of information, a state that somebody is in where they might believe they have proper knowledge and answers, but they are currently in a state where um, they just don't have that, right? Like they might believe they have a lot of answers, a lot of knowledge to a topic, but they actually truly don't. And I don't think ignorance is necessarily a bad thing, because with ignorance is you are lacking that fundamental understanding that you're missing something. But once it becomes revealed to you that you're missing something, it becomes stupidity. Ignorance will become stupidity if you are then faced with a chance to learn the knowledge you are missing to improve, and elect to not do it. And this can come from a number of reasons. And thus, there are a lot of players in League of Legends community that would be classified as stupid, but there are a lot of players that shouldn't be classified as stupid. And such examples of this would be the player you run it. Somebody that would be an example of being stupid would be a person you run into in solo queue that constantly makes the exact same play over and over and over again, and they can't understand why the play is not working, because to them this play should work, and so they're getting mad about it, and then you try to let them know, well dude, we can't help you with that play. For instance, say that your jungler is trying to invade the enemy jungle, but he's not taking into account that all of his lanes are pushed to their towers, so none of your laners can move because they're stuck at their towers. So instead of affecting the lanes and making sure they're in a state that he can then invade from, he's just invading, and he's dying in these invades, and he's then blaming his laners. That is the ideal stupid individual, because his laners will point out they can't do anything to him. And his response to this is to get defensive and get pissed off and to just continue belittling what they're doing and blaming them for his faults. That is a stupid individual. Note, a person that is not stupid is somebody who is doing the exact same scenario. Mind you, a jungler doing the exact same scenario. But the difference is they do this gank, they do this play once, maybe twice. They start getting flamed to a degree, and their realization is, oh, that's just not something I thought about. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop doing it. And they have now learned that they can't do that play without something. They might not have learned how to make that play successful, but they've learned that what they are doing is wrong, and they're going to stop doing it. That is not a stupid person. That is a person who was faced with ignorance and chose to not be stupid. Now, note, just because you are no longer ignorant to a situation does not automatically alleviate the lack of knowledge. It just knows that now you are aware there's a missing knowledge there, And so the step between getting that knowledge and having that knowledge sometimes is going to be just stop doing that, right? If you can't figure out what it is you need to do to be able to do this goal you're setting, then not trying to attempt it in League of Legends at least might be a better option than continuously trying to force it through. So why do I think that in League of Legends specifically there might be some type of fault to Riot in this situation, right? This sounds like a player problem. Well, this is a player problem that has bred from Riot to a degree due to the fact that they have made the game more complicated. They've made the game harder for newer players to learn these things. So the newer players are coming in with a higher amount of ignorance than players that started back in Season 1, Season 2, because there wasn't as much compounding back then that they had to solve. Like, the game itself wasn't solved back then, but to solve the game, there was a ceiling that was seeable. Like, you know, for instance, if I look up at my ceiling here in my house, it's within reaching, it's within a distance I could probably jump and touch it. Meanwhile, if I go to a Sam's Club or Costco, I can see the ceiling, sure. There's no freaking way I'm going to be able to reach it on my own, right? So, like, that's kind of the comparison between back then and now. Like, back then, yes, the ceiling was still technically out of reach, but if I jumped and I tried hard enough, there were points that I could reach it. Nowadays, reaching that ceiling seems all but impossible on your own. And a big part of that is because of how Riot has designed the game. They've added in 100, when I first started, there was 60 some odd champions probably. Nowadays, there's 160 some odd champions. It was daunting for me to learn all the champions back then. I couldn't imagine somebody who hasn't been playing as long as I have trying to learn all the champions now. It's just such a high amount of things that you have to add in, so much knowledge about them just to get a basic understanding of all of them. So when looking at this, this is part of where Riot's design of the game has caused for a higher level of stupidity in its players. Now, or I should say, a higher level of ignorance in its players. But when there's so much room to be ignorant about something in the game, to have a lack of understanding in the game, this breeds more opportunity for stupidity to spawn. On top of that, the lack of having an ignorance about the difference between ignorance and stupidity has led to some more issues. And this isn't necessarily Riot's fault on this case. This is something that happens in culturally, at least in America, probably around the world to a degree as well. People don't want to be perceived as stupid. So lacking information is not necessarily considered ignorant, or if it is considered ignorant, ignorant is generally seen as synonymous with stupidity, right? I'm saying there's a nuanced difference that you need to understand and be able to grasp and tackle. There's a lot of people out there who don't see that nuanced difference, right? We're talking about 2 shades of gray here, maybe 2 shades of black here. It's not necessarily so much of a fine gradient as it is if there's just this really slight tonal shift. So if that's the case, then expecting people to understand it's okay to be ignorant, as long as from that ignorance you will breed the knowledge and understanding that you need to gain some type of knowledge. It's not okay to be stupid, but nobody sees it this way, right? You don't go around there and just be like, oh, sorry, that was really ignorant of me. That is a phrase that some people have said, and I bet you've heard it at least once or twice in your life. But how often have you heard a League of Legends player say that? Pretty much never. Because in gaming culture, not knowing something makes you dumb. And especially when you're looking at younger kids, the faster you're willing to accept you don't know something, the more likely your friends are going to just call you stupid if they did know it. They're not going to share it with you because they're trying to help you improve most of the time. Their immediate response when they find out they know something you don't know is, how could you have not known that, you fucking idiot, right? Like, how many times I've heard that in the gaming space from me growing up, and how many times I might have said that in the gaming space from me growing up in it, was that, there's this concept that not having knowledge makes you dumb. So a game that requires you to have a lot of knowledge is very daunting and very easy for somebody to be like, oh, you don't know this, and that makes you feel stupid. So this feeling of stupid, this feeling of ignorance, this feeling of not being good enough is bred into what League of Legends is today. So in part, Riot's changes that they've made to make the game more dynamic, more fun, and ever evolving have also alienated a younger audience. There's so much they'd have to learn, there's so much time they have to put into it that the immediate reward that they want, right? Like that dopamine rush that they get from playing Fortnite, right? Because you can go into Fortnite and be terrible at building. But as long as you're okay at building and you're really good at shooting, that's all you really need. So, same thing kind of goes with Valorant. You don't need to necessarily know how to use utility. You could just go in and shoot somebody, and you're doing good enough to help your team move. So there's a much more one-to-one ability checking in these other games, right? Shooters are so popular with the younger audience because it's so much easier to measure how good you are at it. When you try to measure that level of skill in League of Legends, a big part of it comes down to the fact that you are now ignorant to a lot of topics. And so you can't necessarily measure it through strictly just be like, oh, look, I've performed by getting 20 kills a game. Well, yeah, but your win rate's 20%, so your kills mean nothing. In Valorant, you can be like, oh, look, I got 20 kills and we've been losing. It's not my fault. Look at this guy that got 3, right? Like you try to say 1-to-1 in League of Legends, it just doesn't work the same. Kills are valuable, but they're not like, they don't just automatically win you the game. In a lot of these shooters, if you've killed off everybody else, you've won the round or the game, right? Battle Royale is last man standing. So if you've killed off a shit ton of people and you're the last person standing, you've won. In Valorant, if you killed off the entire enemy team for the round, you've probably won the round. So it's much more of a one-to-one trade-off for that type of skill. So there isn't a need for having as much game knowledge. On top of that, when you look at these games like Valorant, there's a term that is popping up now because of Valorant. This wasn't a term that really popped up that often in CSGO. Like, it's a nickname more than anything. But, like, in CS, you never heard of somebody called a lineup Larry. Because the question was, hey, who knows lineups? The general consensus was, nobody knows lineups. That's why we're in this elo. The higher elo you went, the more you were expected to just know the lineups at that point. Like, there was an expectation of you to do this. In Valorant, it kind of goes the same way to a degree. Exception is lineup Larrys are generally made fun of. Because if you find a gold or lower person that's really good at lineups, then people are like, oh, you've wasted your time getting good at lineups. Why the hell do you have lineups? Lineups don't do anything for us. You're going to lose this the game, Mr. Lineup Larry over here. Look at him trying to set up this stuff. You're trying to be tactical. You're trying to be smart. But you're at a phase in the game where it's ironic because you're trying to showcase your knowledge, but that everybody around you is belittling you for having more knowledge about the game than them. And a big reason for that is they feel afraid. Like, they feel threatened. You're showcasing that you have more knowledge about the game than them. So how do they defend themselves? By making fun of you and making you feel like you should be looking at the game that way. Meanwhile, in League of Legends, you can't make fun of somebody for knowing more about the game than you. If somebody proves that they know way more about the game than you, it's just fucking frustrating because you want to prove that you're the strongest player. But now if they're showcasing they have way more knowledge about it than you, you're going to get just as defensive as somebody in a shooter, but that knowledge transfers more as a one-to-one in League of Legends, right? Proving you understand the game better in League by showcasing how you understand the game, right? Being a big brain macro guy is celebrated in League of Legends because your big brain's 5-headed, right? You can do 5-headed plays in Valo, but those 5-headed plays are generally how you were playing around a little bit of utility to then kill people. If you're sitting back and using, look at my trajectories, look at my geometry, people are going to make fun of you. Lineup Larrys aren't necessarily praised. They're not necessarily hated, but they're not necessarily praised. Somebody who's in League of Legends that's just like, okay, we're doing this dragon because we have the timer. And then the enemy team tries to come into it and they can't, and they come in one by one and you get all these kills. Your team's going to honor you. Like, in more cases than not, I get honored because I can control the tempo of the game in League of Legends. That's not necessarily me being, oh, look at me microing out my opponent. I'm not usually microing them. I'm just using timers better than them. I'm using windows better than them. You know, I have this short window to get this done, and I get it done in that window because they're not realizing that window's available, right? I am big braining my opponents, and I get honored for it in League of Legends. But just likewise, if somebody does that to me, I'm getting reported in League of Legends, right? I may not understand how they did it. And because I have ignorance, I might acknowledge that what they did was better than what I did. And my ignorance is taken as stupidity. Because, yeah, I'm lacking the knowledge, but I'm lacking the knowledge because I've never learned it. I've never had an opportunity to learn this. I've now seen it. I'm going to review it. I'm going to get better. I'm going to know it next time. But the first time I see it, the community's response to it is you're stupid. So let's round about this back to how in some ways is this from Riot, how Riot has conceived this game, how is this hurting the future longevity of League of Legends? Well, kids want something that's immediate gratification, at least in the US, right? It's already been proven that in Europe and Korea and China, this game is a very hard mainstay, and even in Brazil, this game is getting more popular. So why in the US is it not? Like logically, there's got to be something. For Korea, it's pretty blatant. Uh, Korea PC bongs are just super popular. That's the way that most people play games. So there's an easy way to build up a community, and then on top of that, Riot can market to that community a lot easier because if you know where they're going to be, you just buy up the ad space in those PC bongs to make it be like, look, hey, you guys get to come play for free or whatever if you play League of Legends, or you get reduced rates, and so everybody's going to do that, right? In in Brazil, it's because they're hyper competitive. Brazilians don't care if it's about pure skill or pure knowledge. They are hyper competitive and want to win in everything. So that competition breeds into a game like League of Legends. It's a hard game and it's a skillful game. So they want to prove they have that skill. So it's growing and it's fun to watch. And how the Brazilians take it into the game, they play very aggressively and they play with a hard amount of micro skills. And they're getting better at macro knowledge. But like, shoot, the day I'm recording this, I just watched Loud almost defeat G2 in the first game. Now they got manhandled game two, but game one was such a fiery, explosive, fun game to watch. It made me have hope that CB LOL was going to win. And that's part of what, their fans are also just super dedicated to them. So they've been able to grow. They have super passionate fans, they have super passionate players. That's a big part of it. You go to Europe, and they're kind of building their own kind of culture around esports. It's building up just like soccer or football is there. So you have feeder leagues, you have regional leagues, you have people that are seeing it as a legitimate career. So kids are being taught that yeah, that's a route you can choose to go to. That's a route you can choose to go through. And then lastly, if you look at China, anytime China adopts a sport, be it soccer, basketball, baseball, whenever China has picked up a sport, esports included now, they do not drop it, right? They still have a StarCraft scene. They still have a Quake scene, I believe. Like they have really weird game scenes that are still around that are super popular. Like StarCraft 2 has not died to the degree that it could have worldwide in China because China still has a very dedicated StarCraft 2 scene. League of Legends is growing in that same field because, again, China, for all of the faults as a nation that China might have, China also breeds a high level of competition in their people. So, between that and having one of the highest populations in the world, it's pretty easy to see how League of Legends is still flourishing there. Now, if we go to the US, why is it not doing well in the US? Well, for similar reasons to why sports are starting to decline in the US. There's a lack of a kind of sentiment of growing your talent, allowing it to take time, allowing you to be able to grow over many, many years into the positional player or categorical player that you need to be. And in League of Legends, it takes quite a few months, years at a time for somebody to get decent at the game, let alone good at the game. Will take another, 3 to 4 years. There's going to be naturally people that are very, very good at it, and that's why they stick to it. But if you look at it, how many of these players are putting in that 10 hours a day that they're practicing to actually improve at a degree that makes sense, right? When you look at pros in NA, one of the most shining stars in growing as a player is fudge. And he's not actually American, he's Australian. But when you look at him, what is his mentality in this? Well, he does the mandatory practices, but he takes those mandatory practices so seriously that he's looking at his game, he's asking questions, he's trying to get scrims and play against people to constantly grow who he is as a player. When you look at the people like any other NA player, it's pretty blatant to see, yeah, they do their practices and stuff, but the second practices are done, they're trying to move on with their social life. Or they might already be thinking about their social life in practice, so they're kind of phoning in the practice. They're putting in enough effort to make it look like they're putting in effort, but not enough effort to actually improve to get better. So there are players who are actually super dedicated, and this isn't necessarily a lazy thing, but that's something that right now most of North American players are naturally talented players. And when you look at a player who's particularly naturally talented at a game, right? A lot of these players that are just very good off the rip, they run into a wall where they just can't improve, where they can't push forward, right? They are still very ignorant to how to play the game. It's their natural talent that has carried them to the degree that it is. And so if they don't put in the extra work and they don't put in the extra time to get this full cerebral understanding of the game to match their natural abilities within the game, they're not going to grow and be competitive. And because they're not competitive and they're not growing, guess what? That discourages anybody else who wants to do it. On top of that, we've had a lot of people over the years say, well, if you get stuck in an elo like in plat for like 4 years, you're never going to be a pro. Well, why is that the case? Well, because they're assuming you're not going to put in the work to actually improve past that point. And your natural abilities didn't just naturally carry you past that point. So if your natural abilities carry you to Challenger, the expectation is with actual knowledge and coaching, you're going to somehow become the next, American version of Faker. And that's not the case in a lot of ways, right? There's only so much you can, nurture somebody's natural talent to grow if they themselves are not then going to be putting in that same amount of effort that you are into helping them learn it. So to wrap this back into the ignorance versus stupidity stuff, the ignorance that pro players even have in the NA scene, and even players that are trying to get into that, they have to maintain a level of passion for the game. And that passion has to be about becoming the best and actually be driven to be the best. And they themselves have to take enough responsibility and accountability to grow their skills. If they're just hoping for it to naturally come to them, much like the base level skills they had, that player, I don't think that player is going to hit a wall, because just like the person that's hard stuck plat, this person might be challenger hard stuck, but they're hard stuck at a certain level in challenger, and eventually the game is going to grow to a point that they end up hard stuck in Diamond 1 or Masters. We've seen this with a lot of ex-pros in League of Legends, right? There's certain ex-pros and there's certain pros that have maintained a level of excellence for 5-10 years. And the reason they were doing that, their natural ability and their understanding that they have to grow as a player. Despite the shortcomings that some of the GOATs of North America had, Bjergsen's champion pool felt very limited at times, or Doublelift only being able to really play a style or feeling like he can only play a style where he's the primary carry. These might seem like limitations, but think about the fact that they've been able to play those ways, play those game styles through almost 10 years of play. The game has adapted and changed so damn much, and they've maintained a high challenger and considered the best in those positions for a very long time. It's much why Faker is considered the GOAT. He's been able to adapt and grow with the meta, though he seems to have faults in his play, though he doesn't seem to be unanimously the best in a specific season. The reason he's the GOAT, the reason they're the NA GOATs, it's because of their adaptability and their willingness to learn the next step in the process. So when you have a lot of these players that refuse to grow early on in their career, then you're looking at their ignorance has now become stupidity, right? Every player is allowed to be ignorant about things. You're allowed to be ignorant about a topic. You are not allowed to be stupid, because stupid is elected ignorance. You have elected to not improve. You have elected to stay ignorant about a topic because it requires you to put in effort and work that you don't want to do. And right now, America as a whole, America and to an extent Canada, because they're very similar to us culturally, have bred this idea of instant gratification in things, right? Hey, your job's not paying you enough. Well, only stay there 6 months. After 6 months, you're not getting enough and they're not talking about promoting you. All right, you leave and find a job that pays you more. You've been there for 2 years, leave, right? We don't have loyalty to jobs. And now that's not knocking on the idea of your job is, abusing you and you need to leave. It's the people that have a good job where their job is not abusing them. Their job's just not paying them the highest it could pay them. It's not that they're not paying them well. It's not even that they're not paying them competitively to a degree. It's that their job is not valuing them so highly that they get the keys to the kingdom, essentially, in their feeling. Okay, leave. You'll find another job that does. And in some cases, that's true. But that type of loyalty is the same reason that the organizations in League of Legends at the high end don't have a loyalty to their players as much as some pro teams might, right? Like, think about it this way. A professional quarterback who becomes a franchise quarterback stays with that franchise because they believe that's the player they can build around. Some League of Legends teams have that. But then you look at just in League of Legends, you look in the NFL, and there's certain teams that have gone through like 10 quarterbacks in the last 10 years. And it's because they haven't been able to find that piece that fits to whatever they think their system is. Or they don't have a system, so they blame the quarterback for all other problems, when in reality it's because they don't have a system for them to fit in. In League of Legends, there's a possibility that some of these players' ignorance stems from the fact that the systems aren't there around them. But you also have to take into accountability here how much of the person's accountability is for it, right? Antonio Brown, another Steelers reference, Antonio Brown was going to be a franchise receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers until he started going on a tirade and a tantrum. Him and Le'Veon Bell, a franchise running back, both went on a tirade because they deserved more. The Steelers were paying them both pretty well, but to be able to pay both of them at the rate that they wanted to be paid at was ridiculous. And they both gave up this idea of having an identity on a team because they felt they deserved more. But as soon as each of them went on to other teams, tell me what they did. Antonio Brown went to another team. He almost won he was going to win a Super Bowl with that team, got kicked off that team. Went to another team, almost won a Super Bowl with them, got kicked off that team. Le'Veon Bell went into obscurity for the rest of his career. And you know why these things happened to these guys? Because they greeted for something. They wanted that instant gratification. They didn't care about the work and the effort they needed to put in and the fact that good things would come from it. They weren't playing to be competitive. They were playing to get money. And with some players, that's the case. But the biggest thing is when you are playing for selfish reasons and your reasons are not because you're trying to self-improve, you're going to breed more stupidity. And League of Legends has become a very selfish game that's also forcing you to try to play as a team. So you're running into these issues of, I've kind of went on a tangent to a degree here, but the point that I was trying to get across with all these tangents was that when you're bringing so much room for ignorance, there allows for more space for stupidity, and that stupidity can cause a lot of internal problems. So, based off of the culture that we have, our culture breeds ignorance to a very large degree as well. So when you combine a cultural ignorance along with a game culture of ignorance, you're going to have a lot of stupidity that comes up through it. And on top of that, when you have that much stupidity, people aren't going to want to play because they feel stupid. And if they feel stupid, well, guess what? That's somebody else's fault. I can just go play Valorant where I don't feel stupid because it's not about me being smart. It's about me being good, right? If I'm here and I feel like I'm being dumb at League of Legends, I can feel that impact my games, and I don't want to be held accountable for my stupid actions. I want to go to a game where my stupid actions could win us the game every other game, because it doesn't matter if I'm being stupid as long as I win with the stupidity. And that's kind of how League of Legends is to a degree. Exception is that it's way harder to win stupidly in League than it is in Valorant. So, all in all, this episode has been a really weird tangent. I hope it's kind of enjoyable. I know this is probably not the episode that everybody wants to hear, and so I expect this one not to do as well. But if you did enjoy it, leave a like, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys want to hear about in the future, because I have the plan for next week's episode. Like I said, it's going to be a collegiate based episode. So, we'll be talking about avenues for people to get into college, what's the college scene like, where are our hopes and dreams with the collegiate scene, and the expectations going forward, if it's going to continue to thrive, if it's going to actually grow and thrive, or is it going to potentially sink and die. So if that's an interest topic, keep an eye out next week. If you have any other topics or anything that you guys want me to know about, leave a comment down below, and I'll look into it and try to see if I can study it. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. And until then, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day.